We're going to have Congressman French Hill, who I like to call an upgrade from when I was congressman. He's my congressman, and I'm proud to say that. I live in his district, and he does an awesome job for us. He's a serious person, and he makes a real impact. And I can tell you, because I know a lot of the members of Congress, some of which are clowns, and some are serious. This guy is serious, and he is respected. He knows what he's talking about. He's thoughtful. He reads books. He doesn't just read Facebook. And we love him. And he's leading on a number of issues, but particularly on the Financial Services Committee, whether you know it or not. I don't want to jinx him, but let's just say that he's very senior on the Financial Services Committee. And from that position, he's able to influence and have a big impact for the state and the country. And he's very aware of cybersecurity threats, particularly in the financial sector. And I could read his bio, but I'm going to give him the same treatment I gave everybody else. I'm just sort of going to cut it short and just tell you he's doing a great job for us. He had a incredible, extraordinary, successful career in banking, in the private sector, as a job creator, long before he started representing us in Congress. He knows what that's all about. He also worked in the White House and Treasury in Republican administrations, I think the Bush administration, many years ago, although I think he was only 15 when he was working there. That's how he stayed so young. In any event, I'm really honored to have my Congressman French Hill today. Congressman Hill, please come up, and he's going to share a little bit about cyber threats and financial services. Y'all give him a big round of applause.
Always appreciate an introduction from Tim Griffin, who's doing an outstanding job. Tim, thanks for putting an emphasis on cybersecurity as a critical element for everybody across our state and what it means to us. Also want to thank Lee Watson and the team at Forge Institute for the work they're doing in building a partnership across our state as well. But you know, I come to the podium today, I'm always happy to be anywhere Tim Griffin asked me to be, but as a Vanderbilt graduate, I just want to say, how about the Commodores? You know, I only get to say that every 40 years. So we may not be together. Yeah, you know. And then if you did go to Vanderbilt, then the second most despised organization on the planet is the University of Tennessee. So go Hogs. That was awesome. Absolutely one of the best Saturday nights I've had in decades. So we're gathering today. I'm so glad Jen Easterly was here, that you had a chance to hear her, because she's at the tip of the spear of something that all of us are concerned about, and that is the rapid expansion in cyber crime and cyber attacks. Just 2,300 cyber attacks against 343 million victims in 2023 alone. The costs of cybercrime have increased annually from $3 trillion back in 2015 to $10 trillion next year, and estimated $20 trillion in 2027. And that's why this conference is packed. That's why we're all together to talk about this challenge. But many Americans, including many corporate leaders, believe that cyber criminals are sitting at a fancy multi-terminal setup somewhere, attempting to hack and breach into a lucrative company's firewall and steal data or steal money, kind of like out of a 2000s movie plot. But it's really a lot more simple than that. Every single one of us has a personal responsibility for our own cybersecurity in the roles that we play in our own organizations, at home, at work, on our mobile devices. It's not your company's Dilbert's responsibility. It's your responsibility. But across the spectrum, many employees and companies are not going through the basics that Cheryl May or General Bridges or Jen Easterly would say are the most important things for you in your environment. Are you using multi-factor authentication? Are you clicking on suspicious links? Are you still using passwords? Are you still using passwords? And particularly ones that are easy to guess. Are you sharing sensitive information with unknown parties that they can use that information to get into your company or your network? Does your company or enterprise have the plan and the budget to have thorough internal and external penetration testing? Because this is where many of America's vulnerabilities lie. So while it's true there are hyper-sophisticated domestic and international cyber criminals that are out there working mightily to defeat our firewalls, a lot of crime in this space and risk to our companies' networks are just criminals going around checking every car in the parking lot to see if there's a door open. And they can do that sitting at a desk. So to stop this, we have to coordinate and work together as consumers, industry, and government to make sure that we're keeping our doors locked and our systems secure. As a member of the House Intelligence Committee's subcommittee focused on this area, the National Intelligence Enterprise Subcommittee, and our National Security Agency and Cyber Subcommittee, we're routinely being briefed and working on oversight issues connected to cyber threats towards U.S. companies, consumers, critical infrastructure. The U.S. critical infrastructure is largely owned and operated in the private sector or the local public sector. And the current national cybersecurity framework is mostly based on information sharing and voluntary mitigation efforts. Success requires action by the private sector to engage with federal and state agencies, report cyber intrusions, and ensure their entities are making significant investments in cyber hygiene and network defense. Our time is limited because the threats from non-state and state actors continue to grow, especially from our typical adversaries in this space: Russia, North Korea, Iran, and of course, China's Communist Party. FBI Director Chris Wray in January said, "I have grave concern that China is pre-positioning itself on American infrastructure with the potential to wreak havoc and cause harm to American citizens." Our Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, echoed this sentiment in this year's annual threat assessment. If Beijing believed that a major conflict with the United States were imminent, it would consider aggressive cyber operations against U.S. critical infrastructure and military assets. And then while at Vanderbilt, great location for a talk, last April, Director Wray was more blunt. Translation to Avril Haines: Chinese hacking campaign Volt Typhoon plans to attack and disable U.S. telecommunications, energy, and water systems, and this is the key point, at a time of their choosing to induce panic. That's their offensive strategy, and it made the front page of today's Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Additionally, our nation and our adversaries are entering a new world of artificial intelligence. And AI may now be used by adversaries at a hyperscale to generate malware, evade detection, or convince your network that all is well, when in fact it's under attack. Throughout this Congress, the House Intelligence Committee has been conducting extensive oversight of cyber threats to U.S. critical infrastructure and how best to mitigate and prevent those. Specifically, we have done a deep dive on Chinese threats to the financial, wastewater, water, energy, transportation, and telecommunications sectors. The Department of Homeland Security, acting through CISA, is responsible for coordinating critical infrastructure security facing federal agencies and 16 designated critical infrastructure sectors. And I'm so delighted that Jen was able to be with us this morning, and you heard from her directly, because CISA is key. It's the leading agency to coordinate U.S. stakeholders for sharing cyber threats and educating agencies and critical infrastructure on cyber threat mitigation. In addition to its headquarters staff and hunt forward teams, CISA has cybersecurity officials deployed across the U.S. to interact directly with state and local governments, as well as critical infrastructure and private sector owners and operators. And again, I thank Attorney General Griffin for bringing Jen here and highlighting the work they're doing across our state to keep Arkansas safe, whether it's in the election arena or elsewhere. CISA assesses that a cyber attack, no matter how small, is a threat to national security and has to be identified, managed, and shut down. That sounds really good. But from my point of view, as somebody who spent 3 decades in business and now 3 different roles in the federal government, I think it's a tall task. I think it's a lot easier to say that than to do it. Our Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, is also heavily involved in domestic cybersecurity. The FBI's cyber efforts funded by the National Intelligence Program and is a major focus of our oversight. The FBI's focus is largely investigatory with the goal of making arrests and building cases. And the FBI also responds and supports to victims of cyber incidents. But in my judgment, based on years of hearings, the role of CISA, and the focus of our military cyber assets, focused primarily, if not exclusively, on protecting military national security networks, we still have gaping vulnerabilities. A truly nationally coordinated effort at robust resilience in an old-school civil defense posture across our civilian-led and managed and maintained critical infrastructure is lacking. And I believe it has tremendous room for improvement, which makes today's summit that much more important to those of us in Arkansas. To be successful in defeating the creeping homeland invasion of state and non-state cyber invaders, we need the funding and the teeth in the promise of the 2022 National Defense Strategy. Under that section, Deterring Strategic Attacks on the Homeland, the report recommends, and I quote, "In our work, we'll prioritize closer coordination with U.S. interagency, state, local, tribal, and territorial partners, as well as with the private sector, starting with the defense industrial base." A lack of an all-in civil defense approach, in my view, is a foe inside our own household. I've always loved that expression. It's taken from a set of speeches Teddy Roosevelt made during World War I when he was assessing challenges that America faced internally to try to build a more prosperous future and keep America safe. He referred to those concerns as foes of our own household, and the lack of that comprehensive across-the-board strategy is one. So what action should we take? In Congress, we have our role of oversight, along with the Homeland Security Committee, of Homeland Security protection approaches of CISA and the FBI, as I noted. But the lingering question I have, and that we have as we meet today, what's the role of the states as the responsible parties for much of the oversight of power, water, healthcare, and insurance? State governments, through their interactions with the federal agencies, such as CISA, the FBI, and the intelligence community, are privy to cyber threat data. State governments have the responsibility of promoting adequate cyber practices among their critical infrastructure owners, and importantly, and maybe most importantly, recovery. Recovery. I go to so many of these meetings that we're talking about looking for intruders on our network and blocking them. Critical, super important. But what if there is a takedown? What is the recovery strategy, just like we think about in any other kind of a disaster scenario from a planning point of view? The information that CISA provides on the website details specific cyber events that have occurred and provides suggested mitigation and preventive actions that can be taken against existing threats that are changing every day of every week. Our state National Guard units offer exceptional resources in the fight against cyber attacks and in building this civil defense posture in fighting cyber vulnerability. And that's why I'm so delighted to see General Bridges here, our Adjutant General for the state of Arkansas. The 223 Cyber Operations Squadron of the Arkansas National Air Guard offers unique force protection leverage in a true public-private partnership for the state of Arkansas. By having Arkansans with a cyber background join the Guard and serve and protect our national security in cyberspace, it's equally important the other way around, where that military-trained cyber operator can go implement safe cyber practices in their civilian careers. It's the ideal combination. Our governor can call up the National Guard to aid in instances like natural disasters or civil unrest. How does the governor go about having the authority to call up and have action in the case of a critical statewide infrastructure cyber attack? Do we have the plans and the resources in place? Are federal and state laws and authorities clear about how one would do that? Do our state and federal partners conduct thorough tabletop exercises with that as the scenario? Do we have recovery planning and contingencies in place to recover from an attack of that nature? If we're serious about a state, community, private sector, public sector-based civil defense posture and meet our goals in our national defense strategy, the answer to those questions has to be a resounding yes. Arkansas has successfully ramped up its cybersecurity programs in the past 5 years. A major start was the Cyber Initiative in 2019. And according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, Arkansas enacted 9 new cybersecurity laws during its 2023 legislative session. Much of the work Arkansas has done is typical legislative initiatives. Reporting requirements of cyber breaches, requiring local governments and state agencies to set policies related to technology use and their approach to cybersecurity. Getting state contracts and state technology decoupled from technology that we know is a risk to national security, like that particularly from China. And protecting the privacy of Arkansas citizens and reporting breaches of their data. Earlier this year, a cybersecurity compliance group known as KiteWorks conducted a study on the states where businesses are most at risk of a cyber attack and ranked Arkansas 46, meaning good, in that category. And we are a small state than those mostly at risk, but we also ranked well when it looked at it on a per capita basis as well. So it's comforting that we have our cyber house more prepared than some other states. But the state of Arkansas is taking the right steps, but in my judgment, crafting an all-in, practiced civil defense posture between our public sector in the state, the federal government, our military assets in the state, and the private sector is essential. Now, what about that role for industry in cyberspace? We have to ensure that the federal coordination and state oversight is being embraced and implemented by private industry. During my career, I spent a bulk of it, some 3 decades, in the financial services business, both banking and investments. And the financial sector has long been setting the standards for cyber protection. We also have vigorous information technology regulatory oversight for the banking, brokerage, and exchange supervisors with routine internal and external penetration testing, resilience planning on all financial services elements. And my judgment is, if that's what the financial services sector is doing, can we assume that we have that same level of preparation and thought across the balance of the private sector and critical infrastructure in the public sector? Do they have the same level of oversight requirements that we see in finance in downstream energy pipelines, water systems, power generation and distribution as required by state agency standards? In a recent memorandum President Biden released on national security, said federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial regulatory and oversight entities have a responsibility to prioritize, establish, and implement minimum requirements for risk management. I've sat in these hearings for 18 months now with CISA overseeing critical infrastructure, and I would say, show me the beef on that. I know we've got minimum standards. How are we demonstrating they're being met between vendors, between network administrators, and the operators? Because if we're not enforcing those minimum standards across industry, then how are we assuring ourselves that we're ready to identify, prevent, intervene, block, and unfortunately, if necessary, be resilient or recover from an attack? To not have minimum standards, to not deliver on those, is contributing, once again, to being a foe in our own household. Certain states and sectors, like New York's financial sector, have strong cybersecurity requirements, but that's not all the case across the country. The lack of uniform cybersecurity standards have been seen as recently as in December 2023, where CISA identified an Iranian-affiliated cyber actor exploiting programmable logic controllers against a range of water and wastewater utilities across multiple states in the U.S. The advisory notice of this incident seemed to indicate that basic cybersecurity practices in those instances, such as strong passwords, would have protected against this intrusion. And I know from my long work with Lee Watson at the Forge Institute that this vulnerability at the state level is the vision around which drove his leadership in creating Forge. It's a simple idea. If something really goes wrong on the cyber front at a national level, then we here in Arkansas are left to our own best devices, intervention, and remediation. So I'm grateful that across the nation there's a growing awareness of the need for this civil defense approach, an all-in strategy, and I'm grateful that Attorney General Griffin and Forge are helping lead that way here. But while I argue that there's much room to improve the basics across government and private industry, the sophistication and types of cyber attacks, cyber crime, and vulnerabilities are only growing. Our news is constantly reporting about new attacks, some ransomware related, with critical system shutdowns. We just had the water systems with Israeli software technology attacked 1 year ago following Hamas's brutal attack on Israel exactly a year ago today. We've had last month water system in Kansas attacked on the heels of the Little Rock School District, the Rogers Apprenticeship Information Systems, Central Baptist College in Conway, and many, many others. So regarding ransomware, it's my view it's not as simple as just another U.S. policy like we have for hostages, which is we don't negotiate with terrorists. Applying that to ransomware, it's not that simple, although some have tried. We can't just write it off as another insurance claim, pay the criminals and move on. One of the world's biggest insurance brokers recently said that cyber threats were now outpacing the ability of traditional insurance and risk management approaches to mitigate them. That's a big statement. Another broker estimated that a major cyber attack on any related to our global payment system would cost the world economy $3.5 trillion. And many insurers don't want to include the most prevalent cyber attacks in their policies because the losses could affect their own company's economic vulnerability, or viability, I should say. In my view, underwriters rightfully should demand expansive documentation on just how their covered clients are protecting against cyber threat. In my invitation at the last Forge Institute event, Marsh McLennan, one of the nation's largest insurance brokers, outlined those challenges. This is not to wholeheartedly defend the insurance companies and say they play no part, but it goes back to the beginning of my talk, which is that we are all responsible for the security of our personal cybersecurity, and that extends to our organizations that we work with. But what do you think's worse, in the financial services space, for example, ransomware or fraud. Ransomware is certainly the scary criminal elephant in the room, but in 2023, cyber fraud only accounted to $1 billion in losses in the financial industry. But in 2024, American adults lost $43 billion this year to identity fraud. And that is enhanced through lax cyber hygiene, and in my view, will get worse with artificial intelligence spoofing. The statistics are astounding, and one we should not forget when it comes to the customer-facing aspects of each of your businesses, our public utilities, and our public-facing services from the state government. 1 in every 11 new account creations in finance are attacks. 37% of consumers had new accounts opened using their identity. A third of financial services customers had a fake account opened using their identity. Let that sink in. For every dollar lost to fraud costs the banks and the financial services companies $4. So again, this will only get worse, as I noted, with AI. And it can generate phone calls that sound exactly like your loved one asking for money. It can sound just like your bank's call center. And the same is true on the web. You can log into what you think is your credit card customer service center, and it's not. And this is, I think, a key point for the private sector to protect, is how do we take and turn AI into a protective device where the artificial intelligence produced by the company or by the vendor or by the utility can detect fraud and fight back with new and better forms of identity authentication and blocking the use of adversarial AI. For decades, America has been protected from nuclear risk by the deterrence accomplished by the mutual assured destruction principle associated with our nuclear triad, composed of our land-based nuclear weapons, our undersea weapons, and our air-based weaponry. Today, there are 2 new domains where America's defensive and offensive systems must reign supreme and ensure deterrence. They're in space and in cyberspace. And I hope this conference today, led by Attorney General Griffin, spurs us on, encourages us here in the state, in the private sector and the public sector, to link arms with the federal government, both civilian agencies and our Guard resources, and create building that aggressive posture that's an old school civil defense mentality across our state. Because there's no doubt in my view that changing the culture of how to defend against cyber takes a lot of effort. And it starts with everybody in this room, that we're each of us a leader and advocate inside our own organizations, inside our state and local government, and in working with Homeland Security, the military, and the intelligence community to deliver results. And it all starts, obviously, with personal responsibility. But thank you for having me today. Appreciate the chance, and thank you, Attorney General.